Good afternoon, everyone. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, you can hear you. You guys, okay, very good. Hi, everybody. A warm welcome to you all. I'm trusting that you can all hear me. Very good. My name is Mira Shah. I am a program manager on elevating agricultural adaptation at the Ban Ki-moon Center. I'm based in Vienna normally. And you are here, hopefully attending the event on the impact of climate change on crop nutrient quality and health and solutions for resilient African food systems. We're about to kick off, and we will have a keynote momentarily from Rose, and then we will have a few speakers, and we'll go into a Q&A session. So something pretty easy, pretty standard in some ways, and we'll try and keep it informal. So if you're feeling the need to jump in at some point, please do. You're very welcome to do that. For anyone who's watching live stream, hello, and welcome to the discussion in the room here in Baku. And with that, I will just give a couple points on some of the work that we do at the Ban Ki-moon Center, just to provide some context, really, on the discussion that we're about to have here. So one of the things that we speak a lot about the Ban Ki-moon Center, as you will know, SG Ban's legacy was the Paris Climate Change Agreement and the SDGs. And what we know is that we're actually reversing a lot of progress that we've made on the SDGs. And the Paris Climate Agreement, well, we know where that's going this year. We know we've breached our 1.5 degree target. We're not really making our finance targets, etc. So things are looking pretty bad. But I think there is hope. And I think what we're going to get out of the conversation today, I hope, is some more hope on solutions that are available and solutions that we can take to scale. We know that hunger in the world is rising. We know that in 2022 there was some 733 million hungry people. This was the stat from the UN Food and Agricultural Office. Organization, I beg your pardon. And we know within that also malnutrition is rising. Now, very often you will be told that both of these are happening with climate change. So we will look a little bit into what that means and how it is that climate change is affecting nutrients and is causing an increase in malnutrition. Now, I'm not going to take much more time than that. I will hand over to Rose here. Rose Barbuto is the Vice President of Global Programs from the Farm Journal Foundation, and she's going to give us a keynote address. Over to you, Rose. 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. And if anyone feels like chiming in and asking questions, please do. I'm happy to do that. I think I'm going to stand because there's a lack of a podium and I've got papers. So first of all, I'll tell you a little bit about Farm Journal Foundation. We're a U.S.-based nonprofit, nonpartisan U.S. advocacy organization based in Washington, D.C. We bring together stakeholders from across agriculture, including farmers, industry leaders, and policymakers, to advocate for continued U.S. investment in agricultural development and innovation, aimed at improving the productivity and livelihoods of smallholders producers. To improve global food security and nutrition outcomes, we strongly advocate for more public funding targeted to the needs of smallholder producers so they can better adapt to the climate crisis, feed their families, and transform local food systems. At Farm Journal Foundation, we engage in thought leadership, and we often ask experts to provide analysis to better understand issues impacting agriculture to inform our advocacy with policymakers and come up with messaging. And we commissioned the paper on how climate change impacts nutrition security in low and middle income countries to help us in the agriculture policy space better understand the climate change implications on nutrition, food quality, and health. And we learned so much. The authors, Dr. Rambia Ambikapathy and Daniel Maison de Croix at Cornell University, did an amazing job. I have to say this is a dense paper, and typically we don't. We like to simplify papers and stick to high-level messages, but because the data was so interesting to us and the sources were so rich, we decided that leaving it as a very dense paper would be fine because, as I said, it was really educational for us. I'll start by stating the obvious. Nutrition security relies on a stable and sustainable food system to produce healthy, diverse diets that are affordable and accessible to all. And I'm saying this because I'm going to refer to a few points here on how how the climate crisis is impacting the nutrition security. We've had several global challenges over the past few years, as you relayed earlier. We have had the COVID-19 crisis, obviously climate crisis, and conflicts that have impacted agricultural production and supply chains, sending us in the wrong direction when it comes to food and nutrition security. You already mentioned that 10% of the global population, or 730 million people, are facing hunger, with 3 billion people, or 1/3 of the global population, unable to afford a healthy diet. Women make up almost half of the world's smallholder farmers and produce approximately 70% of Africa's food, yet are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis as they lack access to the right innovations and practices to adapt. Obviously, climate change impacts smallholder farmers directly by reducing household-level food production and income, decreasing purchasing power for nutritious foods, and overall food consumption, increasing food insecurity. But this problem worsens when community and market-level shocks also rise from the same climate hazards, such as food price hikes, which further threaten access to the right quantity and quality of food due to reduced income and increased household needs. Farmers with few resources struggle to fully recover their livelihoods, resulting in long-term poverty and food insecurity, mainly when shocks are prolonged. And in this paper, there were 3 trends that contribute to this that I thought were worth highlighting. 1, diet quality is a key factor that drives all forms of malnutrition. Currently, over 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet, as I mentioned earlier. But importantly, we produce sufficient calories globally, but globally poor diets are responsible for 1/5 of mortality, but in low and middle-income countries, mortality is much higher. To break this down further, countries with informal food system types, the majority of countries in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia that we're talking about and we try to support, where smallholders produce the majority of food, have 76 to 85% of the population who cannot afford a healthy, balanced diet. And these countries' food prices are high generally because of low productivity, the the lack of local food systems infrastructure connecting farmers to markets and processors, especially for nutritious foods, and lack of investment in research and development for local nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables and grains. Moreover, when agricultural production declines, governments often resort to imports to compensate for food deficits. And governments have to make a choice. They either pay for food to be imported or they pay to support agricultural transformation in the food system and local agriculture. They make the choice, obviously, to fund the emergency food assistance that's immediately needed. In general, poor people in many countries spend about 50 to 75% of their incomes on food, so any price spike or negative income shock due to the climate change affects both the quality and quantity of diets. And during shocks, the share of income allocated to staples increases, leaving very little for nutritious foods, which impacts child nutrition. In fact, research shows, and there's a study on this in the paper, that rainfall variability and droughts are associated with reductions in children's linear growth, which I thought was pretty fascinating. Second trend that I'll just highlight is food systems are gendered. Women play a central role throughout the food systems, but they experience numerous disadvantages that affect nutrition. Women are disproportionately at risk of food insecurity, are more likely to do nutritional buffering, which is consuming less so children and their other family members can eat when shocks hit. Women and girls are the first to give up schooling, food, and other resources. This substantially affects their own health and economic productivity and has implications for maternal and child nutrition. The third trend is most food crops, especially local nutritious ones, are produced by small and medium-scale farmers in low and middle-income countries. However, they lack the incentives to produce nutritious crop varieties that can withstand shocks. So we've had staple crop yields have increased substantially worldwide since the 1960s, but these gains are concentrated in rice, maize, and wheat, where generally medium and large-scale farmers benefit, and obviously smallholder farmers do not. So food and nutrition insecurity remains a significant challenge, particularly in Africa and South Asia, because of low ag research investments for smallholders and lack of research for indigenous crops that communities in low and middle income countries depend on for food security, incomes, and nutrition, and inadequate investments in local agricultural institutions supporting research and extension to these smallholder farmers. Now, looking at climate change's direct effects both on crop production and the nutritional value of crops, obviously we know about yields, but obviously climate impacts aquaculture and livestock, which in turn drive food insecurity along with crop yields. Research shows that climate change obviously impacts the quality of crops, but beyond traditional yield measures, increased carbon in the atmosphere tends to contribute to the reduction of protein and minerals in plants while increasing the production of sugars and starches due to changing balances in nitrogen and phosphorus levels. Elevated CO2, for instance, has been shown to decrease protein concentrations in wheat, barley, and rice and potato crops by 10 to 15%. This is less the case for nitrogen-fixing crops like legumes and pulses, but it's still substantial for a lot of staples. Most food crops are also impacted by elevated CO2. The higher concentration of heavy metals or other toxins under climate change by crop also affects the overall food quality, and increased temperature can also increase arsenic and toxins in rice. Livestock productivity decreases with elevated temperatures, stressing the animals and lowering daily weight gain or other productivity measures like milk output and quality. And there are also other climate stressors that we consider, like temperature increases impact plant calendars and contribute to greater water stress, impacting water availability. Seasonal shifts due to rainfall and temperature negatively affect yields in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, where most agriculture is still rain-fed. Moreover, drought events are longer in duration and happening more frequently, delaying recoveries for smallholder farmers and local food security. Research shows that farmers are already seeing declining crop yields due to climate change. In West Africa, yields have fallen by 5 to 20% for millet and sorghum due to extreme climate. As temperature rises, agricultural losses will increase more generally. And just mentioning that climate extremes also impact pollination activities as well, which is super important for obviously nutritious foods like fruits and vegetables. And obviously flooding and soil erosion can result in deteriorated soil health, a crucial determinant of yield and resistance against such events. Taking all of this together, in 2022, sub-Saharan Africa exhibited alarmingly high severe to moderate food insecurity prevalence rates of 60.9%, while Southern Asia had a rate of 40.3%, according to FAO. Unfortunately, it's expected to get worse. At the macro level, the paper indicates that by 2030, West, East, and North Africa will face the most significant losses in producing cereal, meat, fruit, and vegetables, and pulses. Meanwhile, Africa's central region, western and eastern regions will also face more significant losses in producing roots and tubers like cassava and potatoes, which are staple foods for millions of people. We're also facing evidence of a risk of global breadbasket failures for maize, wheat, and soybeans because we are, because we heavily rely on a limited number of cereal crops, making them more vulnerable, and these crops are primarily produced in a small number of countries. So, along with these potential, climate implications for these crops, other shocks like the war in Russia and Ukraine are leading to significant shifts in food insecurity rates globally. Lack of fertilizer, phosphorus, obviously, and wheat producing regions not getting to obviously to the market is increasing food insecurity. So in general, our recommendations focus on increasing research investments for food crops. Thank you, Ollie. Beyond major staple grains and tailoring research for specific geographies, and investing in R&D to improve nutritious value chains. Supporting the value chains for livestock, legumes, fruits, and local vegetables can generate increased employment across sectors that support agriculture, including transportation, processing, jobs for women and youth, while increasing dietary diversity, household income, and supply of nutrients available for consumption in local communities. We also strongly endorse increasing investments in national diet and nutrition surveillance systems so that we can better track these changes. And increased focus on forgotten crops, like local fruits, vegetables, and legumes. There's a lot of genomics available at CGIAR and elsewhere. And so we want to trait mine those the genetics available to improve varieties so that we can ensure that production increases for local crops that people are relying on for food. And we want to operationalize national targets for climate adaptation incentives so that governments can invest in research and extension to help smallholders. We also want to enable financial mechanisms to incorporate nutrition into national climate pledges. And nationally determined contributions so that there's more robust policy framing towards improving nutrition outcomes. Finally, trade-off in genomics. We want researchers to think about trade-offs when they look to improve crop varieties for the traditional traits of higher yields, pest resistance, appearance, harvest, and labor needs. I didn't realize this, but a lot of times when you improve like drought tolerance, you may lose nutritional value in a crop as you're looking to improve that crop. So we want to make sure that researchers are mindful of the nutritional values inherent in the crops that they're working on. They also need to ensure that consumers are consulted at the outset of their work to ensure that they account for consumer preferences. For example, women farmers prefer traits that enable ease of cooking over yield, and some may prefer ease of harvesting over nutrient content, but we have to think about these things. It's also important to note traits that promote shelf stability may have a trade-off with nutrient content, as I was mentioning earlier. Different traits can impact nutrient content, and we want to make sure that researchers are very mindful of the nutrient content so we don't lose that. We want to make sure that nutrients are not lost in the process. So with that, I will wrap up, as I said, the paper is very dense, but would strongly suggest that you read it because I found it really fascinating. So thank you, and thanks to GAIN for organizing this event. It was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose. That was really useful, very insightful on all the different ways in which climate change, nutrition sort of interlink, especially with health as well. So thank you very much, Rose. Before we go into the sort of panel session, let me just do a quick check for everybody. Is there questions in the room? Any comments on what Rose has just said? Do you want to add, perhaps? We're going to keep this, as I said earlier, a little bit fluid and a little bit informal. So I just want to check if there are any questions before I invite the panel onto the stage. Okay, very quiet. And online, shout very loudly. Maybe we'll hear it. I don't know. But thank you again, Rose. And so we now go into the sort of panel discussion that we have. I believe we're expecting 3, but we have 2 in the room at the moment. And if the third panelist will arrive, then we will very happily accommodate her onto the panel. So our 2 panelists for today, we have Oliver Camp. For all those in Baku and in the world of food systems will know him as the WhatsApp man. The guy who runs every single WhatsApp group on food systems, but I'm sure he has a better definition for himself. And Oliver is from GAIN and will be speaking specifically around the linkages with nutrient quality and taking that forward. And then alongside Oliver, we have Pravina Sridhar. I hope I said that correctly, Pravina. Very good. From the Save Soil movement. And Pravina will be looking at how we can scale and address some of these challenges from the soil perspective. So what you did hear, Rose mentioned very briefly in her comments, was actually the impacts on soil and land degradation also then have an impact on crop nutrient quality and health. So with that, Pravina, Oliver, you're very welcome onto the stage, please. And we will get straight into the questions and into the discussions on this subject. Thank you. So we have only the one mic, so I will hand things over as I ask the questions. And well, I'm very glad you're here, and I hope that you can bring the science perspective, because that is where I like to start questions normally. Let's situate this entire conversation on what the science is telling us. And so, Oliver, the first question for you, perhaps if I may, give us a little bit more around the impacts on climate, on nutrient quality. Rose already gave us quite a few, but I would like to hear more specifically a little bit more on child nutrition, perhaps, if you may, and what that means for long-term health outcomes. There you go.
Thank you, Mira. Hello, everybody. I should start with a thank you, really, or a couple of thank yous. Firstly, it's 7 o'clock in Baku, and we're here at the end of the day, so thanks to all of you for being in the audience. If you're online, wherever you are, thanks for joining. And secondly, very many thanks to Mira, who has stepped in at the last minute after our previous moderator was taken ill. I hope Tilahan's getting well, and thank you, Mira. You're heroic. So, well, I'm not an agronomist, and I won't go too far into the science, but what I can talk about is the nutritional impacts that we're seeing at the moment, and some of those nutritional impacts that are getting worse as the climate crisis gets worse. So the first thing is we heard about the yield impact, and that's obviously a huge issue. Reduced production of crops is always going to have a negative effect on both availability and affordability, which, as we know, are 2 really key determinants of people's access to food. I was going to say nutritious food, but I suppose one of the key issues here is that another thing we know is that dietary diversity globally is incredibly low. One of the reasons why we have such major issues of not only calorie sufficiency, hunger, but also micronutrient deficiencies or hidden hunger is because people consume such non-diverse diets. They depend in very large part on staple foods for their sustenance, and those staple foods are naturally not high in micronutrients, but that's getting even worse because of the impacts on climate change. Of climate change, I should say. As Rose laid it out, we know that when there is higher concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, you see a reduction in really critical micronutrients in crops. You see a reduction in iron and zinc in wheat. So if you're getting 70% of your calories from wheat, and then that is being damaged, if you like, or being having its nutrient content reduced, then you can see how that will affect nutrient outcomes. So what can we do? I mean, there is obviously one huge solution that bridges across everything else, which is enhancing dietary diversity. We know that that's incredibly important, particularly in the countries where GAIN works in Africa and South Asia. But then beyond that, there are a couple of other interventions that I'm sure we can explore in detail. And one of the ones that naturally comes up is biofortification. And biofortification is exciting. For anyone who isn't aware, it's sort of naturally enriching the crops that you grow with nutrients. I say naturally because although it can be achieved through genetic modification, sometimes there's an aversion to genetic modification, in which case you can, through conventional breeding, produce crops that are higher in certain nutrients. And that's obviously incredibly helpful, especially when combined with other co-benefits. So you can naturally breed crops to be more pest resistant, to be more drought resistant, therefore to require less water, to be more resilient. So biofortification is one thing that we're trying to scale up in some of GAIN's countries, particularly in Africa, because we think that represents a really good win-win for climate and nutrition. Given that there are two of us on the panel, I'll pause there maybe, and we can go back and forth a little bit on some other solutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for moderating yourself. So now I go to Pravina, and sort of Oliver was already going into some of the solutions that are available and the biofortification, etc. But soil itself can play a role in actually addressing these solutions. So even though climate change makes nutrient quality worse, actually improving soil, as I've heard it, can help to address this challenge. But I don't know enough, so perhaps you can tell us, please.
Hi everyone. Like Oliver said, thanks for being here at such a late hour, and thanks Oliver for having us here. I think it can put this whole panel together, so thanks a lot. Yeah, and I would want to reel back a little bit with respect to what a statement Oliver made about when carbon dioxide increases in air, the nutritional harvested by plants from earth reduces. One may want to wonder why. I'm thinking this through as I speak with you. The micronutrient, especially that the way it comes into the plants, or any nutrients that come into the plants, is not because you are introducing nutrients into the land, not just from the nutrients that you introduce into the land, but actually there is an entire kitchen that's running under our feet, made up of beautiful soil biodiversity, made up of all the microorganisms, your fungal networks, your bacteria, and all of them. So when they cook the nutrients in available format, your micro and macro, to the plants, that's when your plants get the nutrition. Plants do the job of getting them sugars into the land, and microbes does the job of harvesting the micronutrients to the plants. So when carbon dioxide increases in air, why is it that this harvest is reducing? The carbon dioxide has increased in air because when it increases in air, what exactly happens is there's heating happening. And when heating happens, the biodiversity in soil has a certain temperature range within which they are alive. When the temperature of the atmosphere increases and the first centimeter or two of the soil changes, this biodiversity is not alive to cook anymore, because of which the harvesting is not happening, right? So how can soils be a solution? Soils are a solution because when you take care of them properly, they become a solution when you give them the fair share of care that they need. And what is that fair share of care that they need? There are some very foundational principles of sustainable soil management practices, or regenerative agriculture, or agroecology, agropedagogy, whatever you may call them, right? First, the soil should not be disturbed quite often. You cannot go to no-till completely to begin with, but you can start moving towards no-till, reduce the disturbance in the soil. The second thing is, agriculture is a process of mining nutrients of the soil. You need to put it back, and you have to put it back in a manner it's actually available to the organisms in it. So you need to put it back in the form of plant, animal litter, right? So that nutritious cycling is happening, right? So when you do that, therefore the second principle is cycling of nutrition. You do that by intercropping or rotational cropping, or putting back all the plant residue, animal residue back to the land. That's the second principle. And the third one is it's adjacent to the second one. Have livestock in with you, because livestock is not just to eat. Like it actually more than the milk and all of meat that they provide, their dung is way too valuable. We don't realize that their poop, their shit is way too valuable than the milk or the meat we get, because it actually does a very strong role of having the inoculum, basic inoculum, that kind of starts replenishing the inoculum in the soil, right? So soil, when taken care of, when healthy, ensures the food that comes out of it in terms of yield and also in terms of nutrition harvested in it, the micro and macro, the density of nutrition in it is increased. There is a bionutrient institute in Canada, not Canada, sorry, America, USA, and they also work in various fields across. They've studied a lot of fields. If you look at them, the fruits that we consume, some of the grapes, let's say we pick up a grape from a conventional farm and you pick up a grape from a farm that's done regenerative agriculture, the nutrition density, they may look alike, is 8 times on the one that's coming out of regenerative farm. 8 times. It goes to 15 times, 8 times, 7 times, 2 times, depending on what crop they're measuring, depending on what kind of farming it's doing, right? So if you take care of soil well, that's these principles and practices, it provides you it takes care of the nutrition. The second bit, in terms of quantity also, when you take care of soil very well, at some level, you have very little control in the macro environment, whatever carbon dioxide is happening. But the micro environment starts to kind of change for the plants when you take care of the soils by doing different types of cropping and bringing in trees and other things. Second thing, when there is drought or floods, what exactly happens is soils behave in a very intelligent manner. Like if there is a drought, they have a repository of water because the soil was porous enough to hold water when there was rain, and they start giving out some lifeline water to the plants. And when there is floods, they have enough pores to drink up more water, therefore ensuring that the crop doesn't fail, right? So that's how soils do the job.
That's incredible. Thank you very much. I learned a lot from that already as well. So thank you, Pravina, for that. Perhaps we can then move a little bit into the policy side, Oliver. And I would love to know how, I mean, you've given us already sort of the biofortification example and so on. I would like to know how we create these solutions that, you know, we really desperately need, and how we can actually get them to the communities that need them. So where can policy work, and what are the other things that we should be trying to do when it comes to this? Big question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to make the unglamorous point first, and that is the point about just getting the different stakeholders working together on this in such a way that we're even trying to address it. I was talking to someone the other day, and we were saying it's a bad situation to be in a silo, but it's even worse a situation to be between 2 silos. And sometimes nutrition is between 2 silos of agricultural development on the one hand and the health community on the other hand. And somehow we need to bring together these issues around human health through nutrition, climate change, of course, environmental issues, and agriculture. So the first point is to just have that conversation in such a way that we can get to the detail of the policies. A couple of quick wins, if you like. They're not entirely straightforward, but I'll present them as such. Fortification is a good solution. We do think that large-scale fortification of staple foods can help to put back in some of those nutrients that have been lost, and represents still a great intervention to reach a very, very large portion of the population who are relying on staple foods, particularly when that staple food is industrially processed. For people who aren't necessarily eating industrially processed staple foods, biofortification comes in. So having both fortification and biofortification policies and strategies that are mutually reinforcing, that cover gaps in each other, I think that's a really helpful starting point. And then beyond that, it's that much bigger conversation about policies which promote dietary diversity. And this is difficult because it's all things to do with access, availability, affordability, and it's the incentive for farmers as well. So it's great. I mean, it's amazing what Rose said earlier, that one of the crop varieties that isn't so badly affected by the increased carbon in the atmosphere is legumes, right? And nitrogen-fixing crops. We would love to see a widespread shift towards more legumes, both on production and consequently in consumption. But to get there, we need a couple of things. We need a market so that farmers actually want to produce that food. And we need the incentives to be going in the right place beyond the market itself so that farmers have the access to the relevant inputs and obviously to the capacity building and so on to be able to make that shift. So I think there is a sort of design of a combination of interventions where you have biofortification and fortification playing a role. You have incentives to shift production towards different crop varieties, particularly those that are less affected by these issues that we've been discussing. And then you have the shift towards the agricultural production practices that we just heard so brilliantly from Pravina can help to preserve or improve soil health such that the crops that you're growing perform better in all ways, better for nutrition, more climate resilient, and hopefully also higher yielding as well. These are questions of policy, but they do require everyone to come along, not only on the policy side, but also the farmers themselves, the people who are really the stewards of the land who need to be included, the consumers too, and then other actors like retailers, like the value chain actors. So I'm really trying to push this point of these inclusive policies where we can really create a full design, if you like, which shifts diets and supports with that nutritional gap that we see. So it's a big question, but I'll stop there. Thanks, Mira.
Thank you, Oliver. Once again, super useful, very insightful in itself. I'm sure there are lots of examples. We're sitting here at the CGIAR pavilion, so I have to mention the orange-fleshed sweet potato success story. I think this is something that a lot of us already know about, and we know that it helps with the B12 intake, and the outcomes of that have been really quite great from Harvest Plus. So I think that has been a really, really useful already insight into how to put different stakeholders together, as you were saying, but to try and build entire systems around resolving some of these situations that we're having developed. You feel like you're sitting in between health and or nutrition and agriculture, or how did you say it again? Health, climate, and ag. Do you feel like you're sitting in between something, and how are you bridging some of these stakeholders to address these challenges?
We as Safe Soil Movement work for farmers and policies to support farmers to take care of the soil as well. That's a policy initiative. But we also work with farmers on the ground, right? So, like this particular question of policy for nutritional intake, it kind of is like nutrition can't sit in between just those three. It also sits in the fourth corner will be culture, the food culture. What are we used to, right? I don't know, like this is something I've heard. When America is a melting pot of cultures because people from across the world came and settled down. So there was not an American breakfast to begin with. One particular president of America actually put together a plate and said that this is an American breakfast. You know, I come from south of India. We eat fermented breakfast, idlis, dosas. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but so we have a culture of food. Like if you look at our culture, to begin with, we were a lot of millet eaters because we didn't have irrigation. We are rain fed, and we had one monsoon, which is 3 months, and after that you didn't have rains. So you cannot irrigate crops. You grow things that actually grow without rains, right? They can grow with just enough water to sprout, right? So if you look at all the foods we have had, as my grandparents used to have something called as ragi, or it's finger millet, okay? And they never had to take calcium supplements. Whereas we have to take calcium supplements because we just eat rice or wheat. In our attempt, if one has to reflect on why has the diversity or why do we need to look at food policy right now, is because we have altered the eating habits through policy interventions few decades ago, which prioritized hunger abatement. Like production of 1 or 2 crops in large quantities so that at least we are not hungry. The rice and the wheat, in the case of India, it's rice, wheat, corn in case of certain other parts of the world, right? So the policy has to shift from hunger to nutrition by bringing in diversity. I bet every culture has something or the other to do with, like rice is such a beautiful crop from Europe. And like rye breads, if you eat a slice of rye bread, one can experiment oneself. A slice of rye bread, a slice of wheat bread. It's 2 different days. You will feel hungry much later if you had rye instead of wheat, right? But the culture of what we eat, how we eat, is very important. So the policy chain, like the four corners that I made the fourth corner. If you see the four corners, the corners actually trace a chain from production until consumption, from seed to the table. You need constant, policies that tie up this entire chain from production until the consumption. But the biggest policy that will ensure every other policy will fall in place is the consumption policy. Because because we are all in a market economy, the number of ads we see on Instagram feeds, like, please tell me, the women in here, how many times has an ad come and you have by the 10th time chosen to buy the product? Like, it's the 10th or the 15th or the 20th time we end up buying the product. So we are existing in a space where we are flooded by consumerism, and we have succumbed to it as people. So if we can have mechanisms through which there is a pull mechanism, because production is a very push mechanism, right? Production is very much at the source, and consumption is very much at the demand end of the economic spectrum. So when you have the pull mechanisms in place, productions begin to slowly fall in place. For that matter, the superfood that's called as moringa, it's something every South Indian family has a backyard tree, and we make curries out of it. We just pluck some fresh leaves, munch on it, and then spit it out like kids, whereas the juices actually carry the B12. You don't need B12 supplements, right? So consumption pattern will kind of trigger change in the policies in a manner that production also reflects diversity. So I think that can be more like that one thing that triggers a whole lot of things. So I would look at policies from consumption point also, because production is easy to facilitate by having procurement policies in place. If you look at Americas, even in India, you have something called as minimum support price. So the government establishes prices at which some things will be procured. And it's safe bet for farmers to produce those things. If you want policies change there, you need to increase the inventory of crops that one has to set minimum support price and also procure from farmers. But if you get the consumption going, all the other policies in many ways will begin to happen at an accelerated pace. So that's how I see it.
Thank you, Pravina. I will hand over to you in one moment. But I want to ask you both. You've made it sound really cool. You've made it sound very easy. Why are we not doing this? What is the challenge? What is the blockade? So I know that we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to end not necessarily on a bad situation, but I would like to know, what is the problem? Why are we not getting this right? And then perhaps, hopefully, you can add or end with a success story that you're really proud of from both of your organizations. Would that work for everybody? Yeah? Maybe you can comment on her thing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, firstly, I just wanted to make one other connection, and sitting between different areas, this idea that soil falls between lots of different priorities that we have. Bear in mind that we're in a triple COP year. It's the Climate COP right now. We've just had the Biodiversity COP. We go forward to Riyadh and the Desertification COP. It's hard to ignore the fact that soil health is central to all of those. Carbon sequestration for climate, biodiversity, I mean, it is biodiversity, and biodiversity depends on soil, and desertification and land degradation is obviously entirely about soil health and soil health degradation as well. So I really do think that when we're looking at the different strategies that are established under each of the parts of the Rio Conventions, we really ought to be having soil appear across all three. Needless to say, I would also say that that nutrition should appear across all three as a really key outcome that I think bridges the conventions. Why is it not happening? If I've given the impression that it's easy, I really don't think that it is. I mean, I think there are certain things that are quite clear that we need to do in terms of both priorities and then some of the interventions that get us there. But that's not to say it's easy, mainly because we're changing habits and practices that have been formed over decades or longer. Whether that's on the consumption side, food is deeply personal, as we know, deeply cultural as well. we get very used to the things that we enjoy consuming, even when they are the things that are the least good for us. And there is unfortunately a sort of human instinct to seek out often the things that are not very good for us. So we do need to overcome that. And likewise on the production side, we are talking about sort of unknitting and unpicking certain habits that we've got into for very good reasons. You were talking about the idea of increasing production, making sure that we could address hunger. That meant a reliance on well-adapted crops. It meant a reliance on certain fertilizers, certain farming practices, which in a sense were successful, but as we understand now, in a sense have not been entirely successful. And so it means making tweaks. It means making tweaks to what we grow, which will require new kinds of research into the crops that will grow well. It will require new research and development around the inputs that accompany those crops. It will require new development in the farming practices we use for those crops. And as Pravina rightly said, none of that is worth anything if the market side isn't there as well. And the two would be completely disconnected if you don't work on the value chain in the middle of the two. So the transport and logistics and the farm to market linkages, the storage, the distribution and the retail. So there's a lot that needs to happen. And I think to be really specific, the thing that is most challenging is coordinating all of those actors. This idea of taking a food systems approach has, within the food systems community, really taken off in the last few years. But for some people still seems like a slightly odd and new concept that they haven't got used to yet. You hear it around these halls that there are countries and stakeholders who aren't entirely comfortable with the idea of a food systems approach. But for me, this is what it is. The idea of a food systems approach is getting all of those different pieces in the puzzle working together towards an outcome in a way that is mutually reinforcing, rather than a way where one leader goes ahead and the rest of it falls down because the whole system hasn't been in place. To take one example, we've done great demand-side work in Bangladesh to encourage particularly adolescents to shift their consumption habits towards more nutritious foods. But it didn't entirely work as we had hoped, because the production and the availability of those nutritious foods, and indeed then the affordability of those nutritious foods, wasn't there. And so we very, very clearly see in that sort of microcosm that you have to work on the production side and the consumption side to create the market, but create the product to fulfill the market simultaneously. You asked for success, but I'll pause there and hand over to Pravina, and then maybe if we have time before the end to end on a high, then I'll think of something in the meantime. Thank you.
I think just before I give to you one other piece that we forget in this UN sort of universe of things that we're doing is the UN Food Systems Summit. And I think we have to give a shout out to the processes that actually initiated and to sort of recognize that there are actually global movements that are building towards addressing a lot of the challenges that we're facing. So even though we do speak about food in climate, we speak about food in biodiversity and, in general in sort of food diversity, but we also speak about, food in the soil conversation. Actually, a lot of it is tied within the processes that started with the UN Food Systems Summit. So I think I will give a little shout out to that one because it does often get forgotten in this environment of conversations. So back to you then on why don't you end in a success story? Tell us a good positive story where policy may have worked or where you have seen actually positive outcomes come from changes that are being introduced.
I'm going to give you a beautiful success story to go with. Before that, I would just want to share like what Oliver said. The systems approach is something that we have all come to, shape and feel in the last few years. Until now, it's been very either production-centric approach or, just looking at everything's in silo. The safe soil movement that we are, it's based on top of our experience of working with farmers over 30 years and whatever recommendations we have put out there. We call ourselves soil, but we really work for farmers. It's agriculture soils, right? The three things that we ask of the world, the governments in the world is incentivize farmers to do the right thing first in their soils, build their soils, therefore produce things in a very sustainable manner, building health. So we seek governments to do that. Second thing we ask is whatever part of climate finance that's available, a fair share of it should be available to farmers because soils actually can sequester. Right now they are emitters, 25% emitters, on the negative side of zero. They are giving up our carbon. They can actually move from the negative 25 towards positive 27 if they did the right thing in the land, it can start drinking up carbon like nobody's business, right? So you need to make that pot available so that you, what's the word for, like, you know, you kind of instigate the entire behavior change in a very big manner, right? And the third bit that we ask is for consumers to consume healthy food and pay a little bit extra. It's okay. A little bit extra, you'll be paying lot less doctor bills, right? So we really, these are the three approaches or strategies that we propose. And this is coming from our experience of working with over 250,000 farmers. Of the 250,000 farmers, we have been able to get them to adopt to tree-based agriculture, bringing in trees into their land, and then producing crops through natural farming methods over a period of time, transition over a period of time, and seeing improved yields, better quality crops coming in. And what we have figured out in this process of facilitating behavior change is that you have to walk every step with the farmer. You cannot just do one training and expect them to adopt it, because I'm going to give the age-old example that I've been repeating everywhere, and it's a good joke. So if you were to sleep on one side of the bed every day and you are asked, you have a fight, and then you kind of have to sleep on the other side because your spouse has kind of taken that side, do you sleep well? No. It takes a lot of, like, that behavior is not easy to adopt. Just sleeping on one side to another side. When you expect farmers to move from practices that are whatever he is following right now to something else completely, it may be good or bad, whatever that is, it takes a certain amount of effort from his front. You need to walk with him every step of the way. And we have been able to figure out what it means to walk every step of the way. Like, we have a call center that is 12/7. We have farmer experts talking to them. When the guy is going through the transition, he has issues, because different sorts of weeds show up in your farm. When you stop using chemicals, different kind of things start happening to farm, and I don't know what that is. I don't know what it is. So we need to be there by them as the transition happens. And we have a YouTube channel with over 1,000 videos specific to crop in the languages farmers speak. And we have WhatsApp groups of farmers, 1,000 farmers in each one of the groups, over 30 to 50,000 farmers on them. And we have a farmer expert answering, a guy who has gone through the journey himself, answering the issues that farmers are going through when they transition from one particular practice to another. This is the ecosystem that's needed for one to actually facilitate behavior change. And if you have it, this is going to be onerous. This is going to be, as, like, I don't know, what's the global lingo? There's something called a software and hardware in in your non-government work in India. This is the software part of it, the hand-holding. If you have this ecosystem in place, the conversion of people who look towards doing things sustainable and actually start walking in the direction is far higher. So, and we have been able to transition over 250,000 farmers, and after the transition, we have also facilitated market access by bringing in merchants who are ready to procure at fair price, by kind of putting them in touch with consumer markets which are ready to pick up from farmer directly rather than the middlemen and pay a little premium. Therefore, orchestrating success and inspiring confidence that, okay, if I walk this path, I'm not going to fail. So that's where I would like to stop.
Thank you. I will hand over to you. I just want to say farming is a risky business in itself, but change is also risky. And we've added 2 of these risk factors here, so support for both of those are really necessary in a transition. I'll hand over.
Yeah, I owe you a success story to end on a high. By the way, I love that you have a 250,000 person farmer WhatsApp community. Everyone knows how I feel about a food-related WhatsApp group, so that's great. So a good news story. Well, firstly, I mean, I've mentioned biofortification, but I do encourage people to check out what we've done in Tanzania, where the scale that you can achieve by going through the seed multiplication process with just a few farms to then get high iron beans or biofortified foods covering a huge amount of the total production is just incredible. I mean, the scale up can be astronomical in a very short period of time. And so what we've done is increase that production of high iron beans, but then as an offtake, we've had a procurement interventions, so working with school meals and school feeding programs to buy those high iron beans off the farmers, which really does, I think, in microcosm show how this can work. But my favorite example, which is I think an even better microcosm of what we want to see for the food system writ large, is in India. We have this work on tea estates under our workforce nutrition program. And these tea estates are remarkable. I mean, they are enormous. There are literally thousands of people who are living on and around the tea estates, the workers and their families. And they often buy a lot of their food from these shops that we've called healthy line shops as a sort of branded program under GAIN. And the healthy line shops stock not only nutritious foods like fortified foods and like fruits and vegetables, but also some of these crops that we've been talking about that we could shift towards. Those can be bought from local wholesalers, local suppliers who are particularly procuring from, say, farmers with good agricultural practices or who are adopting the kind of production we want to see. And that means that you have this captive market, that sounds like a slightly sinister term, but this market of people on the doorstep who are buying from the healthy line shops and who are able to support the local ecosystem for production of these nutritious foods. Often, by the way, you can combine with things like wash and hygiene products in those same shops, so it has sort of co-benefits around that sort of thing. So there are a couple of papers on the GAIN website about the workforce nutrition program, the healthy line shops in India in particular, and I really think that shows how it can work when you see the food system working in this microcosm, but how it could be scaled up as well to something much bigger. So I encourage you to check it out. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So we end on good stories to start with, and in the panel session we end on time, which is I think a rarity, to be honest, at these things. So thank you both very much for that. That was actually super, super insightful to me, certainly, and I feel that also the crowd was very engaged. So thank you for all of those comments and insights. I know I went off script a lot, but I think that's okay. You did well. So I think what we will do is go into an audience Q&A. I've already asked you a lot of questions. So I'm going to turn around here to the group and see if we have questions already from those who are in the room. Or whether we should go and find something healthy to eat. I don't know what healthy is here, but yeah. Do we have questions in the room here at all? Are we taking online questions? No? Okay, we are taking room questions. Okay, very quiet. I think everybody's ready for dinner after a long day. Do you want to go, Rose?
Since we work in the advocacy and policy space, I'm actually wondering, I know GAIN actually works in country to advise on policies, and I'm just wondering what you guys have done, if there are any success stories getting the governments to kind of align their policies towards better nutrition through the transformation of food systems. Sorry.
So, should we start with you?
Happy to, thank you. Yeah, this has been such a big topic in the last few years about really aligning policy, and that's where I'd start. We've talked a bit about the specific policy interventions we want to see. We could talk for longer about that, but the alignment is the critical first point. And at the moment, a couple of things I'm excited by. Firstly, GAIN is currently working using what we call the policy coherence tool. It's a tool that's been developed by GAIN and Academia 2063. It's being rolled out across GAIN offices in Africa and in Asia as well. And it's really about assessing the extent to which food systems related policies, whether they are kind of primarily agriculture, primarily nutrition, primarily environmental focused, social protection and so on, are they coherent? Are they actually driving towards the same outcomes, or are there trade-offs and even contradictions that need to be addressed? And we think that's really important, because when we talk about taking a food systems approach, and then we talk about silos within government, which very naturally form, we need to try to bridge those gaps so that we are all working in the same direction. And I think that's been particularly successful in a few of the countries where it's being piloted now. I think Nigeria and Mozambique are two of the early front runners, but many countries in Africa are showing a really good signs towards better policy coherence. One other that I'm personally very interested in is the Initiative on Climate Action and Nutrition, which is a COP27 initiative actually, with GAIN and the government of Egypt co-chairing, and then working on that with the FAO, the World Health Organization, Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, and UN Nutrition, long list of partners. But that's really about looking for co-benefits through not only policy, also interventions, programs, financing, but co-benefits for climate and nutrition, where we think these should be mutually reinforcing agendas, but sometimes you just have to be explicit about seeking out those co-benefits. They don't always come naturally, but we think they can come when you're intentional about it. So ICANN and the policy coherence tool are two big areas of focus at the moment. And then just to say, as many in the room will know, we're coming up to the UN Food System Summit +4. In the meantime, we've had the work on the pathways, we've had work on the stocktake in the interim, and I think it's really important now that this coming year we'll have NDCs, we'll have the stocktake, we'll have the One Planet Network Sustainable Food Systems Forum. There's quite a lot going on all at once, which really encourages countries to assess these policies, make sure that they're coherent, make sure they're robust. So I think now is really the moment, Rose, for more of the same as to what you were asking. Pravina, maybe.
So our approach has been a little different than what Oliver is doing at GAIN. We are very focused on having soil policies in place and farmers supported, because we think it's foundational. Get that going, get the budgetary allocations done towards those policies. In India, we have been able to, based on our work with farmers and integrating trees along with the annual crops, from our experience, we have been able to have the government of India allocate over $2.3 billion towards facilitating trees to be integrated in the river basins, because that's something that we found that farmers are not doing because of existing policies which counted trees as forest produce, and that was kind of discouraging farmers, or like keeping them a little bit wary of integrating that. So we have also been able to alter policies that allow for trees to be grown like annual crops rather than they being considered as forest produce. These are the two policy interventions. And we also talk specific to, as I was saying, we'll just look at soil and continue to bang at soil. And the second thing we did with the European Union, we have participated in the soil monitoring directive, shaping of it, and looking at soil not just as a substrate, but actually as a dynamic living ecosystem, be considered in that directive. We are working with various governments. Other than this also, right now we are working with Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and also some Caribbean nations like Guyana to try and see, one is to have it integrated in policy, and the second level also, most governments seek, when you look to engage with them at policy level, they seek for you to exhibit the policy rolled out as a pilot. And when they seek that, we try to ensure that the policy is not a tiny one, but actually of a certain size that when the governments take over that project, they are able to replicate it. So this has been our policy engagement.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. There is another question. Very good. Now they're all alive. Very good.
Thank you so much. My name is Maweje. I'm a farmer from Uganda. I just have a question for the gentleman from GAIN. You talked about the fortified crops or the fortified seeds you're giving out. I think it's now about a month or so in Uganda we are dealing with Plant Variety Protection Act, which becomes very vital for me as a farmer in terms of conservation. So when you talk about the fortified beans, the iron beans, I go into questions of who owns these, the patent of these beans, because when I was reading this variety, it shows that farmers are not allowed to share the seed after it. And when I was listening to her, and we all know in Africa farming is a legacy, it is something that we pass on over generations. So it brings a concern to me about ownership and sustainability of the fortified seeds, which is something good, but I just become conscious. And the rest is just a concern. Do you think it's possible to use the indigenous seeds that we have had over time to fortify them to provide the nutrients that are not in there, so that still farmers can still have the biodiversity concern, but also their ownership of the seeds? Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll leave it.
Okay, shall we start? I'm going to start with...
Yeah, thank you. It's a great point, and we know that this is a tricky issue because no one wants to see the seed supply being captured by a very, very small number of companies and then causing farmers to have issues of access or of utilization, right? So I think as far as I would comment now is to say that Firstly, we know that a lot of the research in this area, in seed development, seed research, is led by international research institutions, the CGIAR, but also very much it should be working with agricultural research and development agencies at national level and regional level, and it should be in partnership with governments so that it's a common good and it's not something that is commercialized for profit. There's currently an issue with the fact that it is very few companies in the world that provide a vast proportion of the world's seed supply, and I think we recognize that either we need to have some fairly strict rules about not owning too closely that intellectual property, the patents, the rights to use, and so on, or we need to distribute that ownership and that production of seeds more broadly. I recognize the issue. I know that it's a really difficult one. I think there isn't a simple answer, but I think through collaboration between local research networks, international research expertise, national governments, local farmers, it can be done in a collaborative fashion. It doesn't have to be done in this way that, as you rightly identify, can put farmers to a disadvantage. To the question about whether we can use indigenous seeds, I mean, the first point is let's use the indigenous crops. I mean, the most important thing is we have over-consolidated and overused crop varieties that are less nutritious, and as you know, we now rely on, I think, 12 crops and 5 animals for the vast majority of what we eat. So, of course, I mean, let's use the indigenous crops first and foremost. And then within that, yeah, we should be using local crop varieties as well, which are often better adapted. They are often more nutritious. They are often the ones that really are right for the local circumstances. Very much appreciate and agree with your points, and I think it's a balance we need to strike alongside investing in research and development so we can increase yields, we can improve nutritional outcomes, and we can improve the climate and biodiversity outcomes as well. I hope that helps to some extent. Recognize the issue. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I am going to wrap up this session unless there's an emergency question of some sort. No? Okay, very good. Thank you both, Oliver and Pravina. It has been super useful and super insightful for me. So thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to join us back in the audience because I understand that we have one final word and call of action. So please join us in the audience. And the roundup, thank you both. Thank you. So, we're going to do a little roundup with closing remarks and call to action. I understand Bertha Mkandawire, and I'm hoping I'm saying this correctly, thank you, is online, and there she is. Very good. Thank you, Bertha, for joining us. I'm not really sure where you're joining us from, but I'm taking it's going to be quite late where you are. So thank you for joining us, providing us with some closing remarks, and perhaps ending with a call to action. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists for honoring our invitation. My name is Beth Mkandawire, and I work here at AGRA. We are based in Nairobi, Kenya. And it's not very late, actually. It's past 6. So maybe it's even late there than here. And I work as a nutrition lead. It was an honor indeed to put up this session with GAIN jointly, because as AGRA, we work with farmers and we work with a lot of farmers. And as AGRA, we are very aware of the challenges that farmers face. Allow me to speak to the work that AGRA does in terms of nutrition before I close this session. What really inspired us as AGRA to jointly bring this topic to discussion is because, as I said, we work with a lot of farmers. And we realize that on the African continent, many people, maybe I would say 60% of the people depend mostly on these staples, and these primary staples, that's maize, rice, wheat, and other staples as their primary source of calories. And knowing that the production of these crops are also facing low productivity, in the face of climate change, that becomes a very big challenge. So as AGRA, we are very cognizant of these challenges, and we always look for solutions. This side event was for us to open up to the world to say, look, we are on a continent where the consumption of these primary staples is high, but with these threats of climate change, especially with the elevated CO2, which cause depletion of nutrients, in staples that are primary staples, it became a concern. We work on biofortification of these crops, and with biofortification, then being faced with climate change, the CO2 depleting these nutrients becomes a threat. So we are basically saying, what would be the solutions? We are open to taking up research as AGRA. That's why this topic is a very research scientific topic. But as AGRA working with farmers, we know that our farmers will be affected if we do not take action. We live on a continent where 52% of the population cannot afford a healthy diet. And that's a very big problem. And increasingly, we live on a continent where statistics on stunting are not improving. We work on the continent where we have a lot of partners, yes, and we recognize that the current work that is being done by the African Union under the CADIP, they are trying to look for solutions, to look for scalable solutions in terms of addressing problems on this continent. Therefore, this topic has come at a time when we are looking for solutions, and AGRA is part of the solutions. At AGRA, we always work to make sure that if we aim to reach to 28 million farmers, we know that is on us. It's also our responsibility to make sure that those 28 million farmers that we are trying to reach to and to support and to change their lives, not only to be sustainable farmers, but also they should not only be subsistence farmers, but also they can improve their economic outlook of their households. In that process, in that interchange, we would like to make sure that their diets are diversified. So making sure that we rescue these crops from carbon CO2 problems should also add to the idea or to the solutions of making sure that we are diversifying these diets. So I'm very glad that from the discussion that was between Pravina and Oliver, there was a lot of talk of what should really be done. We're looking at diversifying production on the farm. We're looking at soil health. And it's just a good topic to talk about soil health, because at AGRA, we are emphasizing on soil health because we know that we cannot have productivity without looking at soil. So soil health has become a bigger issue, not only for AGRA, but for a lot of other partners. And we're looking to solutions that can improve their soil health, because we know that improved soil leads to improved nutrients in the crops that we are growing. Additionally, there has been a talk of multi-stakeholder collaboration, and we believe in multi-stakeholder collaboration because we know, as Oliver said, nutrition sometimes sits in between various sectors, various partners, and if we are not careful, it can drop, it can go to the bottom without being picked up. So multi-stakeholder collaboration is very key, and from this side event, it will be very important for us to look at which other partners are really looking at this topic seriously. We are, as AGRA, we would really want to work with research institutes. Whatever research they are bringing out, it should not be on the shelves. It should not be in publications. That's why we took it upon for AGRA and GAIN to take this very scientific topic to a dialogue, because we don't want just a number of publications that people make, a number of papers that go out, but we want to say, if this is the publication you are saying, if this is the problem that you are saying is the problem, then how do we pick it up? How do we advance this? So at this, on this note, the call to action is really, we would like to work with as many research institutes, as many donors, as many partners, so that we advance. We are already looking at other solutions apart from biofortification. We are looking at promoting other crops like the VAX, those crops that can advance. They can improve soil health, like we are looking at legumes, we are looking at millets, we are looking at other pests, we are looking at sorghum. So as AGRA, we are also moving, we are addressing and we are responding to the continental challenges on nutrition. That's why you see that nutrition has become a bigger part of AGRA. as I speak, we are working on our nutrition strategy, and we'll be very, very open to partners and other stakeholders to work with us to ensure that we implement the agri-nutrition strategy. So on this note, I would like for us not to end this discussion here at the COP, but to advance this topic, to look at it further, to advance more scalable solutions. What Africa needs now are solutions that are scalable to address the stunting rates that are still quite very high among many African countries. As I speak, maybe only 6 African countries are meeting their targets by 2025. The rest are not. So this call to action is to ask the global community to look into Africa and to say, what do you want to do? How do you want to achieve your milestones? And how can you work with us on this continent? How can you work with us as AGRA? How can you work with us with GAIN to make sure that we scale these solutions? So on this note, I would really like to thank all participants online and at the COP for attending this session. This is not the end. This is actually the beginning of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bertha. I'm not sure if you can see us, but we are clapping, so thank you very much for that. I think I'm going to wrap up. Bear with me one moment. Okay. Thank you. That was a very strong call to action, but more importantly, a call for partnership. So I think what we can do best from here is perhaps actually share some cards between ourselves to get that partnership thing going already. So, you know, we will take a moment to stand up, and because we're already wrapping up anyway, stand up, pick out your card, and maybe give it to somebody who doesn't already have one of your cards. And let's get that partnership thing going. We're all interested in the same thing. We're all here for that. So let's get that partnership thing going. With that, thank you, everybody. Thank you for staying so late. Thank you to AGRA. Thank you to CG for hosting us.